Hey there, Walter.
Hey, didn't I make you eat dog food a few weeks ago?
Yeah, and I'm still furious about it. However, I actually found out that I'm one of the worst people on planet Earth, and then I died, went to hell, and I was so bad there that they were like, dude, you should become the devil's replacement. And that's what happened. Can you believe it?
Well, I can't say I'm surprised. I mean, you had slicked back hair instead of pushed back, and you wore a hat that wasn't a stanza, and we all know if you do that, you're going to hell.
Exactly. Ever since I found out about you meddling in our operations at Naughty Dog, I've decided I need to give you some sort of punishment.
Oh my god, what are you gonna do to me? Please don't make me eat dog food. I've been working my way up with gerbil food, but I'm not ready yet.
No, of course not. I'm just gonna give you something, and you have to play through all of it. No questions asked.
Is it Death Stranding?
No.
Alright, then let's go.
Uncharted 3, huh? Wait a minute. How am I supposed to play a picture? Well, you have the Nathan Drake collection digitally, so this is just for dramatic effect. Oh, I see. Well, in that case, you're really bad at this. I mean, why would that be a punishment? I love Uncharted. I can't believe Beelzebub hasn't overthrown you yet. Uncharted 3 is one of the strangest cases of a video game series I've ever seen. The first game was pretty good, but a little bit generic. The second one was a massive improvement and one of the greatest games of all time. But then we got to part 3, which didn't exactly manage to escape the curse that was on it from day one. Not only is part 3 almost never as good with most series, but this game also dealt with a lot of development issues due to The Last of Us being developed at the same time as it, and many of the people who had made Uncharted 2 the true masterpiece that it was moved on from the series for The Last of Us, leaving 3 with the B team. But maybe, just maybe, they pulled through and were able to deliver an experience just as high quality as the last entry. Stranger things have happened after all, and IGN even gave this one a 10 out of 10. That must mean it's good, right? Right? Presentation is something that 3 certainly does well, as pretty much everything is improved even further from Uncharted 2, which already looked phenomenal for the time. Uncharted 3 is definitely in the top 5 for best looking PS3 games, and it really showed everything Naughty Dog had learned from developing on the system. We still have lots of variety and many amazing set pieces such as a cruise ship toppling around, a plane that we're flying out of, and a burning French chateau that we're desperately trying to escape from. I mean, I seriously don't see how this is a punishment. It looks and feels exactly how Uncharted should. Gameplay is very similar to the previous entries as well, with us shooting and climbing all around, occasionally solving puzzles, and discovering ancient secrets and treasures alongside wisecracking characters. However, something about this game is off, quite a bit. Though it manages to maintain the many things that we've come to expect from this franchise, the combat overall feels like it's been changed. The functionality of the guns and everything with which the first game laid the foundation stays, but the difficulty, cover system, and especially pacing have had a sledgehammer taken to them. I can sit back and enjoy a number of encounters throughout the journey, such as the chateau, the plane, and the shootouts on horseback, but at the same time, none of these feel as solid as the fights from Uncharted 2 for multiple reasons. Firstly, you die much more easily than you did in 1 or 2, or at least it feels that way. There were multiple times where I died within just seconds of being out of cover, and it essentially ruins the perfect balance that the last game had between cover-based shooting and on-the-move strategy. It's honestly just unfair and consistently feels practically impossible with the severe lack of cover in certain areas and obscenely bullet-spongy enemies. To be fair, you are fighting British people, and so they're probably just using the same cheat codes that they use to get all the artifacts that are in the British Museum. The health that Nathan has feels like it's been downgraded while the enemies have, at the same time, gained way more health. And no, I did not play this one on a higher difficulty.
Not to mention, the cover system has been totally ruined. In Uncharted 2, you could fluidly move from one bit of cover to the next if you needed to, and it kept you protected extremely well. But this game instead opts to remove this and go back to the janky cover system from the first game. These issues are already pretty annoying, but the sheer inconsistency and pacing issues are really what make this game feel like a weak imitation of what came before it. We begin with a fight in an English pub, which is definitely a highlight in my opinion. It's full of funny and charming moments and really showcases the new emphasis on melee combat in this game quite well. Throughout the game we get a lot of melee segments, and though it eventually gets to be way too much and pretty annoying due to how basic the mechanics of it still remain, this opening is really fun. After this, we spend some time as a younger Nathan Drake in Colombia, and though these chapters are extremely slow and sometimes boring, they begin to explore the relationship between Drake and Sully further, which I think is a great idea. As we'll discuss later though, this idea is pretty quickly dropped, and these are the only flashbacks we get in the whole game, which makes no sense. A few more chapters exploring the London Underground, the aforementioned chateau, and Assyrian Citadel are all pretty fun, and they move along at a relatively brisk pace to keep things interesting despite how basic the individual segments can be at points. I'm seriously not a fan of the spider segments in this game, which are used very frequently during the middle of the game, as they use so many spiders at once that I can't even fear them. I'm terrified of spiders usually, but essentially turning them into a sea of black specks demystifies them too much for it to work for me. There are great puzzles, like seriously amazing puzzles in Act 2, but there's just not solid enough of a mix here between those, actually great combat encounters, and bombastic action set pieces to make it totally great. However, this still good group of levels eventually nosedives as we're captured and forced onto a boat. The boat chapters in this game are, without a doubt, the worst part of any Uncharted game that I've played so far. Though the jet ski does suck quite a bit, it doesn't last that long, and it's not the most frustrating thing I could think of, but the fights on the seas in Uncharted 3 are legitimately terrible. While I do love the insane, exciting, explosive fight when you're actually on the boat, and the chase segment on the cruise ship, the first set of encounters in the shipyard are... ugh. I died an immeasurable amount of times on this due to the obscene lack of cover, ridiculous health downgrades that I mentioned earlier, turrets that can blow you away in a fraction of a second, and powerful enemies that just somehow pop up without any previous warning. These parts are unfathomably preposterous at times, but mostly just an unfair difficulty spike. The chapters before this are very easy most of the time, and rarely challenging, but then here comes this part where you suddenly just have to be a pro at the game. Uncharted 2 did have a difficulty rise with the train, but the whole game built up to that. This game simply goes from really easy to insanely hard at the drop of a hat. Oh, and these parts literally don't even need to exist. I already hated the overly long drug trip and chase segments in Yemen, but after those, we just take a massive detour for like 5 chapters to deal with these boats. You could change the story so that only Sully got captured, and then these chapters wouldn't need to exist at all. They add nothing, many of the fights on them are infuriating, they detract from the real story, and I'm sure that the development time for this mess of an act could have instead been devoted to more flashbacks and chapters that develop the characters more. After an exhausting, ridiculous series of chapters, we finally arrive at the plane and the game seems to start getting better again. Sure, this is the most insanely unrealistic thing I've ever seen, but it's awesome, and the combat encounters on the plane are phenomenal due to the new level of strategy that comes from the cover moving around you. Of course, this idea is almost never used again outside of this chapter, but it's still cool. The Desert Mirage segment is really long and doesn't offer much in the way of the story. If the hallucinations Drake had were more interesting for the plot, this would be a great part, but as it stands, it's just boring. And then he manages to fight off tons of enemies in a village despite not having had water for multiple days, rides on horseback, takes down a truck with a turret on it, and blows open a ghost town's gates. It's pretty fun, but if we're being honest, he would have died of dehydration shortly after beating up one enemy. Then we get introduced to a new character, a native who very clearly rips off Tenzin from the last game. But this time it's just so forced. Tenzin was a minor character, but he still got some development, and Drake didn't immediately act like his best friend, which is what he strangely does this time. Though some of these chapters are very fun, they're both an extraordinarily shameless copy of Uncharted 2, and so rushed. We blaze through so much so quickly that nothing has time to sit with us. The first act of the game had a decent balance of slower and more exciting parts, but after that it's constantly focused on action, and even when it has a chance to slow things down and explore the story like with Mirages, it doesn't. My main issue though is how much of a rip-off the ending is. In Uncharted 2, Nathan is saved from a place with extreme temperatures by natives, and Uncharted 3 has exactly that. He fights through a local village under attack by his foes, and Uncharted 3 has that. He jumps from car to car fighting off enemies, which is there. He discovers an ancient paradise of a city that contains a legendary thing in it, and wouldn't you know, he does the same in Uncharted 3. One of his friends nearly dies, but not really. Yup. He foils the villain's plan and escapes from the crumbling city, then having a romantic moment with Elena, and wow, how strange that the exact same thing is in Uncharted 3. It's grotesque how shamelessly they took everything cool from the second half of the last game and just copy-pasted it, but without nearly as much intrigue, good design, cool characters, or deliberate pacing. It's just a weak copy. Both gameplay segments and story beats are given a fresh coat of paint, but they both crumble under the weak originality and poor design that Uncharted 3 is based upon. The story pretty much undoes Nathan's character development, and then tries to do a tired retread of his arc from the first game by having him work to save Sully. But that doesn't work. He's not interested in the fate of the world anymore like he learned to be in Uncharted 2, so it's almost like this game came before it. Chloe's character remains intact as she's very caring toward the lovable, though kind of dumb Charlie Cutter, but after we're abducted by the pirates around halfway through, the story just totally forgets these characters exist at all. Yes, the second game sort of forgot about Sully, but we had gotten plenty of time with him already. He openly said that he wanted to retire, giving a reason, and the whole point was that Nathan was to learn how to deal with selflessness by himself, so having Sully there would have been counterproductive. These are both relatively new characters though, and they're just pushed aside completely. I wouldn't mind it as much if we knew where they were, Sully's relationship was actually explored, or the game didn't try to desperately replace them with this new guy who Drake's way too familiar with considering how little time we've spent with the character. But it doesn't do any of those. The story is a total mess, not actually emphasizing the relationship that made its existence somewhat justified in the first place, forgetting the arc of the main character, forgetting that some characters exist, using its garbage pacing as an excuse to throw a lightning recap of the last game at you and act like it's something new, and also being so repetitive. Literally every 10 minutes the characters go, "Oh crap, the bad guys found us," and it gets old very quick. Yes, the second game had quite a few times where that happened, but it was handled differently than just the characters being about to move to a new place and then getting interrupted, and it made sense. In that game, the villain was always one step behind you, but in this one, the villain somehow managed to track you down despite not having any of the same clues that you do. Drake takes the only map that shows France and Syria are where to find the object that can lead to the desert coordinates, and yet the bad guys managed to find him both times. It doesn't make sense. And speaking of the villains, they're terrible. The ones in the first game were boring and forgettable, but at least they didn't make me groan every time they were on screen. Rather than keeping the great decision to focus on one good villain, they went back to having 3, and none of them are strong, developed, interesting, or even remotely cool. A pirate who dies without us needing to really do anything, a British lady built up to be this horrible scourge on the main character's life, but who ends up having no development or good scenes, and a random British guy in a suit who literally has nothing interesting about him. Horrible villains, mostly due to their lack of build-up or any explanation on their real motivations, other than a strange line about controlling people with fear. Apparently they want to use the tainted water of this strange city to control people with fear, but they already have tranquilizer darts that can do that, so I have no idea what the point in this quest is. Also, the British guy teleports at one point, and it's never explained how. Great storytelling, guys! The final boss fight also makes the one from Uncharted 1 look like frickin' Baldur from God of War, because it's lame, way too short, has nothing to it, and is the definition of anticlimactic. We just have another melee battle with the generic British guy and try to dodge his knife, and then shoot him a few times when he tries to attack Sully, and that's it. It's an utterly pathetic ending that makes a mockery of the whole franchise. Even though I despise this game's story, the gameplay ranges from frustrating to boring at times, and it's a weak retread of one of my favorite games of all time, it's not all bad. Like Satan said, it's not Death Stranding after all. gameplay is still good most of the time, the presentation is absolutely perfection, and the characters are still mostly likable. There's a very touching moment at the end between Sully and Drake that I adore, and I think the initial promise of this very cinematic journey exploring character relationships is great, though it wouldn't be done justice until later in the series. I like some of the new mechanics, like being able to throw grenades back at enemies, and that's pretty much it, but still, this game isn't all bad. It's definitely a letdown in such a good series and the black sheep of the PS3 trilogy, but it's not 100% irredeemable. I'd give it a 2.5 out of 5 if it was a standalone title, but as part of this legendary series, I can't see myself giving it anything higher than a 2 out of 5. And now I'll be moving on to Uncharted 4. The devil couldn't beat me with this bad game, but who knows what I'll be able to do next. Just kidding. I beat Jak II and Heavy Rain without him wanting me to, even. I can literally do anything. Except for Death Stranding, but we don't talk about that. But for now, let's take a break from the bad games and get into what many call the best of the series, other than Uncharted 2, the fourth game.